45,000. That's a big number. Maybe it's not so big when you consider the sands in the sea or the stars in the heavens. But 45,000 is a big number when you apply it to the number of differing beliefs among Christians. It's been recently reported by the Center for the Study of Global Christianity that there are more than 200 Christian denominations in the U.S. and a staggering 45,000 globally. That's a lot. So why does Christianity have so many branches? Well, a cursory look shows that differences in belief, power grabs, and absolute corruption all had a part to play in the divisions. But on some level, differentiation and variety have been markers of Christianity since its beginning. Apparently, even as I read the scriptures, there has never been a unified Christianity. And we can see the truth of that assessment in Paul's letter to the Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10, he says, I appeal to you, brothers, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind and in the same judgment. Agreement on everything? No differing viewpoints on anything? Surely you jest, Paul. That's simply not possible. Really? Why not? We all know the answer to that question. We are each different. We have differing levels of education, different personalities, different experiences, different beliefs, different cultural experience. All the things that go to make us who we are as an individual is different from one person to the next. So simply put, we are each different. And those differences, though, reveal the manifold wisdom of God. If no two fingerprints are alike, no two snowflakes are alike, no two grains of sand are alike, and all of those are created by God, what gives Paul the idea that we should all think alike? Or is it possible that that is not what he meant? The idea of unity, of course, is a frequent concept in the Bible. Now, apparently there were two women at the church at Philippi who were causing trouble with their disagreements. In Philippians chapter 4 and verse 2, we read, I urge Euodia and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Now, for those of you who have a hard time with their names, I've renamed them based on the fact that they were arguing, called odious and soon touchy, but that's just me. We are told in the Psalms that unity is a blessed experience. In Psalm 133 and verse 1, behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. Paul also tells us to be eager for this unity. In Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 3 says, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Peter wrote to the Jewish Christians who were scattered away from Jerusalem and encouraged them towards unity. In his first epistle, chapter 3 and verse 8, he says, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. And let us not forget the prayer of Jesus on the night before he died in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, and I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you, Holy Father. Keep them in your name, which you have given me, that they may be one, even as we are one. So we see from the Old Testament through the New Testament, unity is among people is something that is to be desired. There's even a situation recorded in Genesis that shows us the power of unity. In Genesis chapter 11, beginning in verse 1 through verse 6, now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Unity is a powerful force in the land. Now this, what I just read to you, is the story of the Tower of Babel. The people were using their unity for something that would bring them trouble. So the Lord confused their speech, and each sounded like they were babbling to the others. We can see from this that there is power available to a group of people who become united in purpose. But it is this lack of unity of purpose which has contributed to the weakness and ineffectiveness of the church in the world over the centuries. Denominations have been formed in an attempt to have a large group of people believing and saying the same thing, but even that didn't work. We now have more than 45,000 denominations in the world, each one of whom lay claim to having the truth. And if that's our situation, then there is something tragically amiss in this method of trying to establish unity among the brethren. Even within our own denomination, there are differences of opinion which have threatened the unity to such an extent that there have been splits. As many of you know, I was part of the charismatic movement for a few decades. During that time, I witnessed many new churches come into existence. Almost every one of those churches with which I was familiar eventually split. What I observed is that when a church is born from a split, it carries within it the seeds of division and will itself suffer a split later on. And while many people may leave a particular congregation and they don't form another church, if they leave because of something the preacher said or did, then they're still in that same condition. They carry the seeds of division within them to the new habitat. And yet we know that it is simply not possible for us to agree on everything. Therefore, we are left with trying to understand how to maintain this unity that King David, Jesus, Paul, and Peter each urged upon us. We can see that doctrinal unity is out. Political unity is a pipe dream. Economic equality is an exercise in futility. Any attempt at any level for any kind of unity of thought is destined to fail. As we're told in Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 12 says, There is a way which seems right to a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. However, if we can possibly see through our differences, there is a way in which unity can be maintained. It's not a unity of everybody saying the same thing or thinking the same thing. For some reason, we have seemed to place all of our eggs into the basket of doctrinal purity. We've made that the standard of our right relationship with the Lord and our right relationship with one another. And if you vary from that, then you are wrong. And in some places, you get kicked out. And even though people no longer choose a church based on its doctrine, they will still vanish if something is taught with which they disagree. But Paul makes it plain, though, that this is not a criteria, nor is it desirable. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 3 through 4, we read, For you are still of the flesh, For while there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not of the flesh and behaving only in a human way? For when one says, I follow Paul, and another, I follow Apollos, are you not being merely human? In our case today, what I'm talking about, it would be the same if we replaced the words Paul or Apollos with Baptist, Presbyterian, or some other denominational title. When our affiliation is held up as the standard for righteousness or right believing, we are not operating as a spiritual person. This is true even if we say, I follow Christ. For Paul had said earlier in chapter 1 and verse 12, what I mean is that each one of you says, I follow Paul, or I follow Apollos, or I follow Cephas, or I follow Christ. It's still division. Now, many people have come to the place where they are able to agree to disagree. Now, that agreement is not always amicable when it's stated, but at least it's a step in the right direction. The unity which is desired by the Lord is not that of everyone believing the same thing, even though that is a part of his plan for the future. We see in Philippians chapter 2, verses 10 and 11, so that the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. In that day there will be perfect unity of speech, but that day is not yet. And in that day it won't matter about what we believe about water baptism or communion, or whether you can play cards, or whether you can sleep in on Sunday, or all those other things that tend to divide people. Until then, we are urged to desire and expect unity, and we're told how to achieve it. Back to Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 3, we read, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Unity is maintained through being held together in peace. Therefore, we should avoid disturbing the peace. That's what Paul encourages us in Romans chapter 12 and verse 18. He says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with everyone. Too often we want to blame the others for the lack of peace. How much of it is our fault? How much of it should we give to trying to be at peace? It is up to you. It's up to me. It's up to everyone to avoid disturbing the peace. That is, the peacefulness of unity. So how can we do that? We can take Paul's words here in this verse and resolve to refuse to touch the bone of contention. Let me ask you a question. Is your opinion really so important that you must give it even when it is not asked for? When you think about it, if you observe situations, is that not the cause of many arguments that we may have? We have offered our opinion in contrast to another opinion that was stated, and yet our opinion was not asked for. And if we could learn to hold our opinion to ourselves, there would be nothing to argue with. Takes the wind out of the sails. So if your desire is to maintain unity in the bond of peace, then you will best be served by learning to hold your peace and keep your opinion to yourself when you know it will only result in an argument. Now, I'm still learning this. I'm not saying I've arrived. But sitting around tables and listening to conversations, especially when I go to different places and I'm mingling with different people of other churches, I hear things with which I disagree. But is it necessary? that I point out a differing viewpoint. I think our former pastor here, Mary Kay, would say something about choose your battles, or that's not a hill I want to die on, something like that. Why do we have to give our opinions? We will still have our differences, but our differences will not be the source of our division. When we can learn to love the brothers and the sisters because they are brothers and sisters. I saw a statement last night from a friend. I can't quote the whole statement, but something along the lines, if you grew up with siblings, then you have learned something about how to get along because you've learned about suspicion, arguing, all those kinds of things that go along with growing up brothers and sisters, and yet you still love one another. We can apply the same thing across the board for all that we have to do. Is my opinion that important? We can be unified even with our differences. And in that place of unity, who knows what would be possible when unity is achieved through the bond of peace? What kind of power is there?